Sentinels as Ethan Carter dragged a zip-tied Mayor Gregory Walsh through the mud. The rain hammered down on Port Haven, a forgotten speck of a town in Oregon's coastal shadow where the ghosts of the 2015 wildfire still lingered in the skeletal pines. At 3:07 a.m., the fire station on Elm Street was a tomb of silence, save for the faint hiss of a coffee maker and the crackle of a dying radio. Ethan Carter, 36, a firefighter with creases etched deep into his face from too many sleepless nights, slumped in a chair, staring at a faded photo of his younger brother, lost to a fentanyl overdose 3 years ago. Across the room, Lila Tran, 28, a rookie EMT with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue, scribbled notes for her next certification exam, trying to drown out the small-town whispers that she didn't belong. A sudden frantic scratching at the bay door sliced through the quiet. Ethan's head snapped up, the photo slipping from his fingers. Lila froze, pen hovering. The sound wasn't a stray begging for scraps. It was desperate, like nails clawing for survival. Ethan crossed the room in 3 strides and yanked the door open, the cold rain slapping his face. There, trembling under the amber glow of the station's floodlight, stood a German shepherd, its black and tan coat matted with mud and blood. Its left paw bled onto the pavement, leaving faint red smears, but what stopped Ethan cold was the object clamped in its jaws, a woman's running shoe, gray with a neon yellow stripe soaked in crimson. The laces, knotted tightly around the dog's muzzle, dangled like a grim tether, and tucked into the tongue of the shoe glinted a small, rusted key. "Jesus," Ethan muttered, crouching to meet the dog's gaze. Its amber eyes burned with something beyond pain. Purpose. The dog dropped the shoe at his feet with a wet thud, the key clinking against the concrete. It barked once, sharp and commanding, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the empty street. Lila joined him, her flashlight sweeping over the scene. "Ethan, that's not just blood," she said, her voice low but steady. "Look at the laces. Someone tied them on purpose." The dog's ears twitched, its body taut as it turned toward the dark expanse of Blackthorn Woods, a mile beyond the station. It took a limping step, then looked back, its eyes locking onto Ethan's. "It wants us to follow," he said, his gut twisting. Lila knelt beside the shoe, her gloved hand hovering over the key. "This is a message, Ethan. Whoever sent this dog, they're not just lost, they're in trouble." Ethan's mind raced. Port Haven was no stranger to secrets. Rumors of drug runners using the woods had circulated for years, and his brother's death had only deepened his suspicion of the town's underbelly. But a dog dragging a bloodied shoe to their doorstep, this was something else. "We call the cops," Lila said, reaching for her radio. Ethan grabbed her wrist, his voice low. "Not yet. You know how Holt is. If this is tied to the woods, he'll bury it before we get answers." Lila's eyes narrowed. "You're saying we trust a stray over protocol?" Ethan looked at the dog, its ribs visible beneath its soaked fur, yet standing like a soldier awaiting orders. "I'm saying that dog walked 3 miles through a storm to find us. It's not a stray, it's a messenger." The dog whined, a low, urgent sound, and took another step toward the woods. Ethan grabbed a flashlight and the station's med kit, his heart pounding. Lila bagged the shoe, her hands steady despite the tremor in her voice. "If we're doing this, we're doing it fast." "That blood's fresh." They moved to the rescue truck, and against every rule in the book, the dog leapt into the front seat, sitting rigid, eyes fixed on the road ahead. Ethan slid behind the wheel, the weight of the unknown pressing on his chest. "You ready for this?" he asked, glancing at Lila. She clutched the bagged shoe, the key glinting faintly. "No, but that dog is—" "Let's go." The truck roared to life. headlights cutting through the rain as they followed the German shepherd's silent command into Blackthorn Woods. The question burned in Ethan's mind. Who had tied that shoe to the dog, and what horror waited in the darkness? But as they turned onto Old Quarry Road, a gravel path swallowed by gnarled trees, the radio crackled to life, unprompted. A distorted voice, barely audible, hissed through the static, "You shouldn't have come." Ethan's blood ran cold. The dog growled, its hackles rising, and in that moment he knew this wasn't just a rescue, it was a trap. The rescue truck's headlights carved a shaky path through the rain-soaked dark of Old Quarry Road, the gravel crunching under the tires as Ethan Carter gripped the wheel. The German shepherd, now called Shadow by Lila's quick naming, sat rigid in the passenger seat, its bloodied paw leaving faint smears on the vinyl. Its amber eyes stayed locked on the road as if it could see through the storm to whatever lay waiting in Blackthorn Woods. Lila Tran clutched the bagged shoe in her lap, the rusted key inside glinting faintly under the dashboard light. The radio's static buzzed, the distorted voice from moments ago. "You shouldn't have come," still echoing in Ethan's head. He glanced at Shadow, whose low growl hadn't stopped since the transmission. "You heard that, didn't you?" Ethan muttered, half to the dog, half to himself. Lila's voice cut through the tension, sharp but unsteady. "Ethan, we're out of our depth." That wasn't some prank call. Someone knows we're here. She checked her phone, the screen glowing with no signal. "And we're cut off." "No bars, no backup." Ethan's jaw tightened. He knew calling Officer Ryan Holt was a risk. Holt had a reputation for looking the other way when it came to the woods, where whispers of fentanyl deals had grown louder since Ethan's brother overdosed. But going back wasn't an option. Not with Shadow's relentless focus, not with that blood-soaked shoe. The truck lurched as the road narrowed, branches scraping the sides like skeletal fingers. Shadow's ears twitched, and he leaned forward, a soft whine escaping his throat. "He's got something," Lila said, leaning closer to the windshield, the dog's nose pressed against the glass, his breath fogging it as the truck rounded a bend. Ethan slammed on the brakes. Ahead, barely visible through the rain, was a faint trail of blood on the gravel, leading into the tree line. "That's fresh," Ethan said, his voice low. He grabbed the flashlight, its beam cutting through the downpour, revealing a single, unmistakable print. A woman's shoe, matching the one Shadow had carried. Lila's breath caught. "Ethan, this is a crime scene. We need to call it in." Ethan shook his head, his eyes on Shadow, who was already pawing at the door. "Not until we know what he's leading us to. Holt's too cozy with the wrong people. You want answers, we follow the dog." Lila's fingers tightened around the bagged shoe, her voice dropping to a whisper. "You're betting our lives on a stray?" "He's no stray," Ethan snapped, his voice raw. "My brother died because no one followed the signs. I'm not making that mistake again." The words hung heavy, and Lila's expression softened, just for a moment. She nodded, grabbing the med kit. "All right, but if this goes south, you're buying me coffee for life." Shadow leapt from the truck the second Ethan opened the door, his limp barely slowing him as he bolted into the woods. Ethan and Lila followed, their boots sinking into the muddy underbrush. The forest closed around them, the charred pines of Blackthorn Woods looming like silent sentinels. The air smelled of wet earth and something sharper, iron. Shadow moved with purpose, weaving through thorns and fallen logs, pausing only to sniff the ground. Ethan's flashlight caught another smear of blood on a tree trunk, then a torn piece of fabric, a woman's scarf, navy blue, soaked and heavy with crimson. "Ethan, look," Lila whispered, pointing to a faint carving on the tree above the scarf, the initials SM scratched into the bark. "Could be a name. Sophie? Something?" Ethan's stomach twisted. Sophie Miller, a 9-year-old girl, had gone missing 2 days ago, her face plastered on every lamppost in Port Haven. "If that's her," he started, but Shadow's sudden growl cut him off. The dog froze, ears pricked, staring into the dark. Ethan swung the flashlight, and there, glinting in the beam, was a tripwire stretched across the path, barely visible. "Get down!" Ethan shouted, yanking Lila back just as a loud crack echoed through the trees. A net, weighted with rocks, collapsed from the canopy, missing them by inches. Shadow barked furiously, his hackles raised, lunging at the shadows. Lila's voice shook as she scrambled to her feet. "Someone set that. They knew we were coming." Ethan's pulse raced, his mind flashing to the radio's warning. He grabbed Lila's arm, pulling her close. "We're not alone out here." Shadow didn't wait. He darted forward, following the blood trail, and Ethan and Lila stumbled after him, the tripwire a stark reminder of the danger closing in. As they pushed deeper, the rain slowed, but the air grew heavier, thick with the promise of something worse. Ethan's flashlight flickered, and in its dying beam, he saw Shadow stop dead, his body rigid. The dog's nose twitched, and he let out a low, guttural whine, staring at a small clearing ahead. There, half buried in the mud, was a child's backpack, purple with the name Sophie stitched in fading thread. And beside it, glinting in the faint moonlight, was a single bloodied dog tag engraved with one word: Max. Ethan's heart stopped. Shadow, or Max, knew this place. And whatever he was leading them to wasn't just a rescue, it was a reckoning. The rain had dwindled to a faint drizzle, but the air in Blackthorn Woods hung heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth and something metallic that clung to the back of Ethan Carter's throat. He stood frozen in the small clearing, his flashlight beam locked on the purple backpack half buried in the mud, the name Sophie stitched in fraying thread. Beside it, glinting under the pale moonlight, lay a bloodied dog tag engraved with a single word: Max. The German shepherd, Shadow, or Max, as the tag suggested, stood rigid, his amber eyes fixed on the backpack, a low whine escaping his throat. Ethan's heart thudded, the weight of the discovery sinking in. This wasn't just a rescue mission. The dog knew this place, knew Sophie, and the bloodied shoe he'd dragged to the fire station was only the beginning of a much darker story. Lila Tran knelt beside the backpack, her gloved hands trembling as she unzipped it. Inside were a child's sketchbook, a broken crayon, and a crumpled photo of a smiling girl with pigtails, Sophie Miller, the 9-year-old whose missing posters had haunted Port Haven for 2 days. "It's her," Lila whispered, her voice cracking. She held up the photo, her eyes meeting Ethan's. "She was here, Ethan. Maybe still is." Ethan's gaze shifted to Shadow, whose ears twitched, his body coiled like a spring. The dog's limp hadn't slowed him, but the pain in his eyes told a story of loss that Ethan recognized all too well. He thought of his brother, Tommy, dead at 27 from a fentanyl overdose, his body found in these same woods. Ethan had failed to save him, but he wouldn't fail Sophie or Shadow. Port Haven was a town built on promises it couldn't keep. Once a thriving logging hub, the 2015 wildfire had gutted its heart, leaving behind shuttered mills, empty storefronts, and a growing opioid crisis that filled the gaps with despair. Ethan, a third-generation firefighter, carried the town's expectations like a weight on his shoulders. At 36, he was a man of quiet resolve, his divorce and Tommy's death carving deep lines into his face. The fire station was his sanctuary, the only place where the ghosts of his failures didn't follow. Lila, the new EMT, was different, 28, ambitious, and unafraid to challenge the status quo. She'd moved to Port Haven from Seattle, chasing a fresh start, But the town's suspicion of outsiders made her feel like she was always proving herself. Shadow, with his disciplined posture and scarred flank, was no ordinary stray. His every move screamed K9 training, yet he wore no collar, no tags, only the bloodied dog tag now clenched in Lila's hand. "We need to keep moving," Ethan said, his voice low but firm. He scanned the clearing, the tripwire from minutes ago still fresh in his mind. Someone had set that trap, someone who knew they were coming. The radio's warning, "You shouldn't have come," looped in his head, and he couldn't shake the feeling that Officer Ryan Holt, the town's golden boy cop, was tied to this. Holt's name came up too often in whispers about drug runners using Blackthorn Woods as a hideout. Ethan had never trusted him, not since Tommy's death, when Holt's investigation conveniently found no leads. Lila stood, slipping the dog tag into her pocket. "This tag says Max. You think that's his real name?" She looked at Shadow, who tilted his head, as if acknowledging the question. Ethan crouched beside the dog, his hand brushing the matted fur. "Max or Shadow, he's been through hell to get here. He knows something we don't." Shadow's tail flicked, and he took a step toward the far edge of the clearing, his nose low to the ground. Ethan followed, his flashlight catching a faint trail of broken twigs and smeared mud leading deeper into the woods. Lila hesitated, her voice soft but urgent. "Ethan, we're not equipped for this. No radio, no backup, and someone's already tried to kill us." "What if Sophie's—" She didn't finish, but the fear in her eyes said enough. Ethan turned, his expression hard but not unkind. "I've buried too many people in this town, Lila. My brother, my neighbors, kids who didn't make it. If Sophie's out there, I'm not leaving her to the wolves. Neither is he." He nodded toward Shadow, who whined softly, as if in agreement. They pushed forward, the forest growing denser, the charred pines closing in like silent judges. Shadow moved with relentless purpose, pausing only to sniff the air or nudge a patch of earth. 10 minutes in, they found another clue. A woman's scarf, navy blue, tangled in a thorn bush. Lila examined it, her flashlight revealing dark stains that weren't just mud. "Blood," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "And look." She pointed to a small, crumpled note tucked into the folds, its ink smudged but legible. "They won't find her." "Not again." Ethan's blood ran cold. "Not again," he repeated, his mind racing. The words hinted at something older, a pattern buried in Port Haven's shadows. He thought of the rumors, missing hikers, unsolved cases, all swept under the rug. Shadow growled, his hackles rising, and Ethan swung his flashlight toward the sound. There, half hidden behind a tree, was a fresh footprint, too large to be Sophie's. "Someone's been here," he said, his voice tight. "Recently." Lila's hand went to the medkit slung over her shoulder, her eyes scanning the dark. "Ethan, we're being watched." "That trap, the radio, now this? We're walking into their game." Ethan nodded, his hand resting on the small utility knife at his belt. "Then we play smarter. Shadow's not leading us blind. He's got a scent." As if on cue, Shadow bolted forward, his limp barely noticeable now, driven by some unseen force. Ethan and Lila scrambled to keep up, their breaths visible in the chilly air. The trail led to a rocky outcrop where Shadow stopped, his nose pressed to the ground. He pawed at the dirt, uncovering a small, rusted tin box, its lid dented but intact. Ethan pried it open, revealing a single item, a faded Polaroid of a woman in her 20s, smiling with a German shepherd at her side. The dog looked eerily like Shadow, down to the scar on its flank. Scrawled on the back in shaky handwriting were 2 words: Anna Evans. Lila gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Anna Evans. She went missing 5 years ago. It was all over the news. They never found her. Ethan's mind reeled. Anna's case had been Port Haven's last big mystery before Sophie's disappearance. A young teacher vanished without a trace, her car found abandoned near these woods. Holt had called it a runaway case, but Ethan had never bought it. Now, with Shadow's dog tag and this photo, the pieces were starting to connect. Shadow was hers, Ethan said, his voice thick with realization. He's been out here all this time, waiting. Lila's eyes welled up, but she blinked it away, her voice fierce. Waiting for what, Ethan? To find Sophie, or to finish what happened to Anna? Shadow whined, nudging the box, and Ethan noticed something else inside, a small, bloodied keychain with the initials R.H., Ryan Holt. The shock hit like a punch. Holt wasn't just turning a blind eye. He was part of this. Ethan's hands shook as he pocketed the keychain, his voice barely a whisper. We've got a dirty cop. And Shadow's leading us straight to his secrets. But before they could move, a twig snapped behind them, loud in the silent forest. Shadow spun, his growl deep and feral, and Ethan's flashlight caught a fleeting shadow darting between the trees. Someone was out there, watching, waiting. And they weren't alone. The Blackthorn woods seemed to tighten around Ethan Carter and Lila Tran, the charred pines looming like silent witnesses to secrets buried deep in Port Haven soil. The faint drizzle had stopped, but the air was heavy, laced with the sharp tang of blood and pine sap. Ethan's flashlight trembled in his grip, its beam still locked on the figure that had darted between the trees moments ago. A shadow, human-shaped, gone before he could blink. Shadow, the German shepherd, stood rigid, his growl a low rumble that vibrated through the muddy clearing. The rusted tin box lay open at Ethan's feet, its contents, a Polaroid of Anna Evans and her dog, and a bloodied keychain marked R.H., burning holes in his mind. Officer Ryan Holt, Port Haven's trusted cop, wasn't just negligent. He was involved, and Shadow, once called Max, was leading them straight into the heart of his betrayal. Lila's voice broke the silence, sharp and urgent. Ethan, we need to move. Whoever that was, they're not gone. Her hand hovered over the med kit slung across her shoulder, her eyes scanning the dark. The Polaroid was clutched in her other hand, Anna's smile a haunting contrast to the bloodied keychain now tucked in Ethan's pocket. He nodded, his jaw tight. Shadow's got the scent. We follow him. The dog's ears twitched, and he took off, limping but relentless, weaving through the underbrush with a purpose that made Ethan's chest ache. This wasn't just a dog. This was a survivor, carrying 5 years of grief to find justice for Anna, and, maybe, Sophie Miller, the 9-year-old whose backpack they'd found minutes ago. The trail grew treacherous, roots snaking across the path, slick with mud. Ethan's boots slipped, but he caught himself, his flashlight catching glints of blood on the leaves. Fresh, too fresh. Sophie's close, he said, his voice low, as if speaking too loudly might summon the watcher from the shadows. Lila's breath hitched. Or whoever took her. Shadow paused, his nose pressed to a patch of earth, and pawed gently, uncovering a small, crumpled note pinned under a rock. Lila snatched it, her flashlight revealing smudged ink. She's mine now. Stop looking. The word sent a chill down Ethan's spine, but it was the faint logo in the corner, a stylized wave the same as the one on Holt's squad car, that made his blood run cold. Holt, Ethan spat, his voice thick with disgust. He's not just covering tracks, he's leaving them. Lila's eyes widened, but before she could respond, Shadow growled, his hackles rising. The dog's gaze locked on a cluster of trees to their left, where a faint rustle broke the silence. Ethan swung his flashlight, catching the glint of metal, a hunting knife, abandoned in the dirt, its blade stained red. Someone's playing games, Lila whispered, her voice trembling but resolute. She crouched, examining the knife without touching it. This is deliberate. They want us scared. Ethan's mind raced, memories of his brother Tommy flooding back, his lifeless body found in these woods, Holt's dismissive report claiming it was just another overdose. "They're not scaring me," he said, his voice hard. "They're pissing me off." He looked at Shadow, whose amber eyes burned with the same fire. "Lead on, Max." The name felt right, a tether to Anna Evans, whose disappearance 5 years ago now felt like the key to everything. Shadow bolted forward, and Ethan and Lila scrambled to keep up, the forest growing denser, the air thicker with the stench of decay. They stumbled into a small ravine, its slopes slick with mud and littered with debris. Shadow stopped at the edge, his nose twitching, and let out a sharp bark. Ethan's flashlight swept the ground, landing on a pile of leaves that looked too neat, too deliberate. He crouched, brushing them aside, and froze. Beneath was a child's shoe, blue with a cartoon star, caked in blood. Lila gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Sophie," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Oh, God, Sophie." Ethan's heart pounded, but Shadow's sudden whine pulled his attention. The dog pawed at the ground nearby, uncovering a second item, a syringe, its needle glinting in the flashlight's beam. Lila's training kicked in, and she examined it from a distance. "Fentanyl," she said, her voice tight. "High grade, street stuff. This isn't a random junkie's stash. This is a deal gone wrong." Ethan's mind flashed to Tommy, to the needle marks on his arm, to Holt's smug assurance that there was no foul play. "Or a deal gone right," he muttered, his voice raw. "Holt's not just dirty, he's running this." Lila's eyes met his, fear and determination warring in her gaze. "Ethan, if Sophie's caught in this, we're not just saving her. We're exposing a whole operation." Ethan nodded, but before he could respond, Shadow's growl deepened, his body tensing. The dog's gaze snapped to the ravine's edge, where a faint light flickered through the trees, a flashlight moving fast. Ethan killed his own light, pulling Lila down behind a fallen log. "Stay low," he whispered, his hand on Shadow's scruff to keep him quiet. The light grew closer, accompanied by the crunch of boots and a low, muttered curse. "They're here!" A man's voice hissed, unfamiliar but laced with panic. "The dog found the kid's stuff. We need to move her now." Another voice, colder, replied. "Holt said no loose ends. If they get closer, we end them." Ethan's blood froze. He glanced at Lila, whose face was pale but set, her hand gripping the med kit like a lifeline. Shadow's growl was barely audible, but his body vibrated with restrained fury, ready to lunge. Ethan's mind raced. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and deep in a trap set by men who knew these woods better than he did. But Shadow's presence, his unwavering focus, grounded him. "We can't fight them here," he whispered to Lila. "We need to find Sophie first." Lila nodded, her voice barely a breath. "Shadow knows where she is. Look at him." The dog's eyes were locked on the ravine's far side, where the trail continued, marked by another smear of blood. They waited, hearts pounding, until the flashlight moved away, the voices fading into the dark. Ethan released Shadow, who took off silently, leading them down the ravine's slope. The trail grew faint, but Shadow never wavered, his nose guiding them to a cluster of rocks. There, half hidden in the shadows, was a small, makeshift camp, a torn blanket, a water bottle, and a child's drawing of a dog, crumpled but unmistakable. Sophie had been here, and recently, but what stopped Ethan cold was the final clue Shadow uncovered, a burner phone, its screen cracked but still glowing with a single unsent message. "Help. He's coming back." Lila's voice trembled as she read it aloud. "Sophie's alive, Ethan. She's fighting." Ethan's throat tightened, the weight of his brother's loss and Sophie's hope colliding in his chest. He looked at Shadow, whose ears were pricked, his body poised for the next move. "She's not the only one," he said, his voice thick with resolve. But as they prepared to follow Shadow deeper, a new sound pierced the silence. A child's scream, faint but unmistakable, echoing from the heart of the woods. Shadow's head snapped toward it, his growl turning feral, and Ethan knew they were running out of time. The trap was closing, and Holt's men were one step ahead. The child's scream still echoed in Ethan Carter's ears, a raw, desperate cry that cut through the damp silence of Blackthorn Woods like a blade. His flashlight beam trembled as it swept the ravine, the torn blanket and Sophie Miller's drawing, a crude sketch of a dog clutched in Lila Tran's shaking hands. The burner phone, its screen glowing with the unsent message, "Help, he's coming back," lay at their feet, a ticking clock. Shadow, the German shepherd once called Max, stood poised at the ravine's edge, his growl a low feral warning. His bloodied paw left faint prints in the mud, but his amber eyes burned with unrelenting purpose. Ethan's heart pounded. The weight of his brother Tommy's death 3 years ago, found in these same woods, dismissed as an overdose by Officer Ryan Holt, fueling his resolve. Sophie was alive, and Shadow was leading them to her. But the voices they'd overheard, Holt's men planning to end them, meant the trap was tightening. "Lila, we move now," Ethan whispered, his voice rough but steady. He pocketed the burner phone, its message a lifeline to Sophie. Lila nodded, her face pale but set, the medkit slung over her shoulder. "That scream! She's close, Ethan." "We can't lose her," Shadow whined. His ears pricked toward a faint path winding deeper into the forest, marked by smears of blood and broken branches. Ethan's mind raced. The syringe they'd found, laced with fentanyl, and the keychain with Holt's initials pointed to a drug ring operating under the town's nose. Holt wasn't just a dirty cop, he was a predator, and Sophie was caught in his web. They followed Shadow, the dog moving with a limping grace that belied his wounds. The woods grew darker, the charred pines closing in, their skeletal branches clawing at the sky. Ethan's flashlight caught glints of metal, another tripwire, hastily set. He grabbed Lila's arm, pulling her back. "They're hurting us," he muttered, his pulse spiking. Lila's eyes darted to Shadow, who skirted the wire without hesitation, his nose low to the ground. "He's not falling for it," she said, her voice a mix of awe and fear. "He's been through this before." The path led to a clearing dominated by a crumbling warehouse, its rusted roof sagging under years of neglect. Faint light flickered through the broken windows, and the air carried a sharp chemical tang. Fentanyl, Ethan realized, his stomach churning. Shadow stopped at the edge, his hackles raised, and let out a sharp bark. Ethan killed his flashlight, crouching beside Lila. "That's their base," he whispered. "Sophie's in there." Lila's hand tightened on the med kit, her voice barely audible. "And so are they." Before they could plan, a low hum broke the silence, a generator kicking to life inside the warehouse. The flickering light grew brighter, casting jagged shadows across the clearing. Shadow's growl deepened, and Ethan's hand went to his utility knife, useless against armed men, but better than nothing. "We need a way in," he said, scanning the structure. Lila pointed to a side door, half ajar, its hinges rusted. "There, but we're walking into a hornet's nest." Ethan looked at Shadow, whose eyes were locked on the door, his body coiled. "He's not backing down. Neither are we." They crept toward the door, Shadow leading, his steps silent despite the limp. The chemical stench grew stronger, mixed with something worse, rot. Ethan's heart sank, memories of Tommy's lifeless body flashing before him. He pushed the thought aside, focusing on Sophie. They slipped inside, the warehouse's interior a maze of crates and rusted machinery. Stacks of plastic-wrapped packages lined the walls, fentanyl, enough to flood Port Haven for years. In the center, a single bulb swung from the ceiling, illuminating a metal table strewn with syringes and scales. But it was the sound that stopped Ethan cold, a child's whimper, faint but unmistakable, coming from a locked door at the far end. "Sophie," Lila breathed, her voice thick with hope and dread. Shadow whined, pawing at the door, his claws scraping the metal. Ethan reached for the handle, but a sudden, deafening roar shook the warehouse. The air turned hot, and a wave of orange light erupted from the crates, flames licking the walls. "Fire!" Ethan shouted, yanking Lila back as the blaze spread, fueled by the chemicals. Shadow barked furiously, lunging at the locked door, undeterred by the heat. "It's a trap!" Lila yelled, coughing as smoke filled the air. Ethan's eyes stung, but he saw it, a figure in the shadows, slipping through a side exit as the fire roared. The man turned, his face briefly lit by the flames. Ryan Holt, his expression cold, a gas can in hand. "Holt!" Ethan roared, his voice lost in the crackle of the blaze. The betrayal hit like a punch. Holt hadn't just set the trap, he'd lit the match. "We have to get Sophie!" Lila screamed, pulling Ethan toward the locked door. Shadow was already there, his barks frantic, his body pressed against the metal. Ethan grabbed a crowbar from a nearby crate, his hands burning as he pried at the lock. The flames closed in, the heat searing his skin. "Come on," he grunted, the lock finally giving way. The door swung open, revealing a small, concrete room. There, curled in the corner, was Sophie Miller, her face pale, her wrists bound with rope. She looked up, her eyes wide with terror. "Help me!" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the fire's roar. Lila rushed to her, cutting the ropes with a pocket knife. "We've got you, Sophie. You're safe now." But the words felt hollow as the warehouse groaned, beams collapsing overhead. Shadow nudged Sophie, his nose gentle but urgent, urging her to move. Ethan scooped the girl into his arms, her small body trembling against his chest. "We're getting out," he said, his voice fierce, though doubt gnawed at him. The fire was everywhere, the exit blocked by a wall of flames. Lila's eyes met his, her face smudged with soot. "The side door. It's our only shot." Ethan nodded, but as they turned, a new sound cut through the chaos, a low mechanical click. The side door slammed shut, a heavy bolt sliding into place from the outside. Holt's voice echoed through the smoke, chillingly calm. "You should have stayed out of the woods, Carter." Ethan's blood boiled, his grip tightening on Sophie. Holt wasn't just running drugs, he was willing to burn them alive to keep his secrets. Shadow's bark snapped Ethan back to the moment. The dog lunged at a stack of crates near the locked door, pawing frantically. Ethan followed, his heart racing, and saw it, a rusted vent cover barely wide enough for them to crawl through. "Lila, help me!" he shouted, prying at the cover with the crowbar. The metal groaned, giving way just as a beam crashed behind them, sparks raining down. Lila pushed Sophie toward the vent, her voice steady despite the panic. "Go, Sophie. We're right behind you." Sophie crawled through, Shadow squeezing in after her, his fur singed but his focus unbroken. Lila went next, and Ethan followed, the heat scorching his back as he pulled himself through the narrow passage. They tumbled into the cool night air, coughing, their clothes blackened with soot. Sophie clung to Lila, sobbing, while Shadow stood guard, his growl aimed at the burning warehouse. Ethan's chest heaved, his mind reeling. They'd saved Sophie, but Holt was gone, and the fire was destroying any evidence of his crimes. Lila's voice was raw, her eyes blazing. "Holt tried to kill us, Ethan. He's not just dirty. He's a monster." Ethan nodded, his gaze falling on Shadow, who limped toward Sophie, pressing his head against her side. The dog had led them to her, through fire and betrayal, but the fight wasn't over. Holt was still out there, and the keychain in Ethan's pocket felt heavier than ever. As the warehouse burned, a new question burned brighter. What else was Holt hiding? And how far would he go to keep it buried? The acrid stench of burning chemicals clung to Ethan Carter's clothes as he crouched in the muddy clearing outside the smoldering warehouse, his arms wrapped protectively around Sophie Miller. The 9-year-old's sobs had quieted, but her small frame trembled against him, her wrists raw from the ropes that had bound her. Lila Tran knelt beside them, her soot-streaked face lit by the dying flames, her med kit open as she checked Sophie's pulse with steady hands. Shadow, the German shepherd once called Max, stood guard, his bloodied paw planted firmly in the dirt, his amber eyes scanning the dark expanse of Blackthorn Woods. The warehouse fire roared behind them, its heat a fading echo of the trap set by Officer Ryan Holt, who had locked them inside to burn. Ethan's chest heaved, his mind churning with rage and questions. Holt wasn't just a dirty cop running fentanyl, he was a murderer, and Sophie's rescue was only the beginning of unraveling his web. "Sophie, can you tell us anything?" Lila asked softly, her voice gentle but urgent as she wrapped a bandage around the girl's wrist. Sophie's eyes, wide and haunted, flickered to Shadow, who whined softly, pressing his nose against her hand. He said I'd be safe if I stayed quiet," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "But he lied. He hurt people." Ethan's jaw tightened, his hand brushing Sophie's tangled hair. "Who?" "Sophie." "Holt?" She shook her head, her voice trembling. "Not just him. Someone bigger. They called him the boss." Ethan exchanged a glance with Lila, the word boss landing like a stone. Holt wasn't working alone. The keychain with his initials, the burner phone with Sophie's plea, the fentanyl stockpile, all pointed to a larger operation, one that reached beyond Port Haven's borders. Shadow's low growl pulled Ethan's attention. The dog's ears were pricked, his gaze fixed on the tree line where the fire's glow didn't reach. "He's sensing something," Ethan said, his hand moving to the utility knife at his belt. Lila zipped her med kit, her voice low. "Holt's men could still be out there. We need to get Sophie to safety." Ethan nodded, lifting Sophie into his arms. "The truck's a half-mile back. We move fast. Stay low." Lila hesitated, her eyes on Shadow, who hadn't budged, his growl deepening. "Ethan, he's not coming." "Look at him." The dog's body was taut, his nose twitching as he took a step toward the woods. Ethan's heart sank. Shadow had led them through fire to save Sophie, but his mission wasn't over. "Max," Ethan said, using the name from the dog tag, his voice thick. "You're not done, are you?" Shadow's ears flicked, and he bolted into the trees, his limp barely slowing him. Ethan cursed under his breath, shifting Sophie's weight. "We can't lose him," he said, his voice urgent. Lila grabbed her flashlight, her expression torn. "Ethan, Sophie's hypothermic. She needs a hospital now." Sophie's small hand clutched Ethan's jacket, her voice barely a whisper. "Don't leave the dog. He saved me." The words hit Ethan like a punch, echoing his failure to save his brother Tommy from these same woods. He looked at Lila, his eyes fierce. "We're not splitting up. We follow him together." They plunged into the forest, Ethan carrying Sophie, Lila's flashlight cutting through the dark. Shadow's path was clear, broken twigs, smears of blood from his paw, leading them deeper into Blackthorn's heart. The air grew colder, the chemical stench fading, replaced by the damp rot of decay. 10 minutes in, Shadow stopped at a rocky outcrop, his nose pressed to the ground. He pawed at the dirt, uncovering a small, leather-bound notebook, its pages stained with mud and blood. Lila knelt, opening it carefully, her flashlight revealing hurried handwriting. "Holt's not the head. Walsh pulls the strings." Anna knew they buried her for it. Lila's breath caught. "Walsh?" "As in Mayor Gregory Walsh." Ethan's mind reeled. Walsh was Port Haven's golden son, a former logger turned politician who'd rebuilt the town's image after the 2015 fire. His face was on every billboard, his speeches about hope and community a staple at town halls. But the notebook, in Anna Evans' handwriting, painted a different picture, a man orchestrating a fentanyl empire, using Holt as his enforcer. Anna was on to them, Ethan said, his voice low. That's why she disappeared. Sophie whimpered, her voice faint. The man in the suit, he came to the warehouse. He scared them. Ethan's blood ran cold. Walsh had been there, tying up loose ends. Shadow whined, nudging the notebook, and Ethan noticed a folded paper tucked inside, a map hand-drawn, marking a spot labeled Safe House, deep in the woods. This is where they're keeping the rest, Ethan said, his voice tight. More drugs, maybe more kids. Lila's eyes widened, but before she could speak, a sharp crack echoed through the trees. A gunshot, close. Shadow's head snapped up, his growl turning feral as he lunged toward the sound. Ethan set Sophie down behind a boulder, his heart racing. Stay here, he whispered, pressing her small hand. Lila drew her pocket knife, her voice shaking but resolute. Ethan, we're sitting ducks. Ethan grabbed a fallen branch, his only weapon, and followed Shadow, Lila, at his side. The dog led them to a narrow gully where a figure crouched over a fresh-dug hole, a shovel in hand. The man turned, his face lit by Lila's flashlight. Not Holt, but a stranger, wiry and scarred, wearing a jacket with the same Wave logo as Holt's squad car. You're too late, the man sneered, raising a pistol. Shadow moved faster, a blur of fur and fury, tackling the man to the ground. The gun fired, the shot going wild, and Ethan swung the branch, knocking the man out cold. Lila rushed to tie his wrists with a bandage from her kit, her hands shaking. He was burying something, she said, her voice urgent. Ethan's flashlight swept the hole, revealing a plastic bag stained with blood. He tore it open, his stomach churning. Inside was a woman's wallet, a locket, and a faded ID, Anna Evans smiling just like in the Polaroid. They didn't just kill her, Ethan said, his voice breaking. They erased her. Lila's eyes welled up, but she blinked it away, her voice fierce. They won't erase Sophie. Or us. Shadow's sudden bark cut through the moment. His nose pointed to a faint trail leading from the gully. Ethan pocketed Anna's ID, his resolve hardening. He's still tracking, he said, lifting Sophie into his arms again. Lila's voice was raw, her eyes on the unconscious man. Ethan, this is bigger than Holt. Walsh is running a machine, and we're the only ones who know. Ethan nodded, his gaze falling on Shadow, who stood ready, his bloodied paw a testament to his loyalty. Then we take it apart, piece by piece. But as they followed Shadow deeper, a new sound stopped them cold, a low mechanical hum, like a drone circling overhead. Lila's flashlight caught a glint in the sky, a small black shape darting between the trees. They're watching us, she whispered, her voice trembling. Ethan's grip tightened on Sophie, his mind racing. Walsh wasn't just covering his tracks, he was hunting them, and Shadow's trail was leading them straight into his crosshairs. The hum of the drone faded into the night, but its presence lingered like a ghost over Blackthorn Woods, a reminder that Ethan Carter, Lila Tran, and Sophie Miller were being hunted. Ethan's arms ached as he carried the 9-year-old, her small body curled against his chest, her breathing shallow but steady. Lila's flashlight cut through the dark, her face smudged with soot and determination, the med kit bouncing against her hip. Shadow, the German shepherd once called Max, led the way, his bloodied paw leaving faint prints in the mud. The leather notebook, Anna Evans's damning record of Mayor Gregory Walsh's fentanyl empire was tucked inside Lila's jacket, its weight heavier than the girl in Ethan's arms. The map they'd found, marking a safe house deep in the woods, was their only lead to dismantling Walsh's operation and finding justice for Anna, whose wallet and locket they'd unearthed minutes ago, buried like her memory. The forest was a labyrinth of charred pines and tangled roots, the air thick with damp rot and the faint chemical tang of fentanyl. Shadow moved with relentless focus, weaving through the underbrush, his limp a quiet testament to his sacrifice. Ethan's heart pounded, the drone's surveillance tightening the noose around them. Officer Ryan Holt, Walsh's enforcer, was out there, and the unconscious thug they'd left tied up in the gully wouldn't stay down forever.
"We're exposed," Lila whispered, her voice low but urgent. "That drone's feeding our location to Walsh."
Ethan nodded, his jaw tight. Shadow's got a plan. Look at him. The dog's ears were pricked, his nose low, following a scent only he could trace. Sophie stirred, her voice a faint murmur. "The dog. He found me before." In the dark, Ethan's chest tightened, his eyes meeting Lila's. "He's not stopping now," he said, his voice soft but fierce. "Neither are we." The map led them to a narrow ridge where Shadow paused, his growl low and steady. Below, half hidden by overgrown vines, was a dilapidated cabin, its windows boarded, its roof sagging. A faint light flickered through the cracks, and the air carried a sharp, medicinal smell. "The safe house," Ethan said, his voice barely audible. "This is it." Lila's flashlight swept the cabin, catching a glint of metal, a padlock on the door, new and out of place. "They're hiding something," she said, her voice trembling with anticipation. Shadow pawed at the ground, uncovering a rusted key half buried in the dirt, the twin to the one tied to the bloodied shoe. Ethan's pulse spiked. "Anna left this," he said, his voice thick. "She knew someone would come." Lila's eyes welled up, but she blinked it away, her voice steady. "Then let's make her right." They approached the cabin, Shadow's growl a constant warning. Ethan set Sophie down behind a tree, her small hand clutching his sleeve. "Stay here, okay?" "We'll be back." Sophie nodded, her eyes on Shadow, who pressed his nose against her hand before turning back to the cabin. Ethan tested the key in the padlock, his hands steady despite the fear gnawing at him. The lock clicked open, and the door creaked, revealing a stale, sour air. Inside was a single room, lit by a flickering lantern. Crates of fentanyl lined the walls, but it was the center of the room that stopped Ethan cold. A metal chair, bolted to the floor, with blood-stained ropes coiled beside it. Lila's breath hitched. "This is where they kept her. Anna, maybe Sophie too." Shadow whined, his nose pressed to the floor, and pawed at a loose board. Ethan pried it up, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside was a USB drive, labeled AE in Sharpie, and a faded photo of Anna with a younger Ryan Holt, their arms around each other, smiling. "They were together," Ethan said, his voice raw with shock. "Holt didn't just kill her. He loved her." Lila's eyes widened, the USB drive clutched in her hand. "Then why bury her? What changed?" Before Ethan could answer, Shadow's growl turned feral, his body tensing. The lantern flickered and a shadow moved across the wall, not theirs. Ethan spun, his utility knife raised, as a figure stepped from the darkness. Clara Evans, Anna's older sister, her face gaunt, her eyes hollow. She held a pistol, its barrel steady, aimed at Ethan's chest. "You shouldn't have come," she said, her voice cold but trembling. "You're digging up things that need to stay dead." Ethan's heart stopped. Clara, who'd left Port Haven after Anna's disappearance, was supposed to be in Seattle grieving. "Clara, put the gun down," he said, his voice calm but firm. "We found Sophie.
We're trying to stop Walsh. Clara's laugh was bitter, her eyes glinting with pain. Stop Walsh? You think he's the only one? Anna trusted Holt and he sold her out. I trusted this town and it let her die. Now you're stirring it all up again. Lila stepped forward, her hands raised, the USB drive still in her grip. Clara, we found Anna's notebook. She named Walsh. We can expose him, but we need you. Clara's grip on the pistol tightened, her voice breaking. You don't get it. Walsh owns everyone, cops, council, even the press. Anna thought she could fight him, and they buried her for it. I've been watching, waiting, but you're just more bodies for his machine. Shadow's growl deepened, his body coiled, but he didn't lunge. Ethan's mind raced, the photo of Holt and Anna burning in his memory. Clara, was Holt with Anna when she died? He asked, his voice soft but probing. Clara's eyes flickered, a tear escaping. He loved her, but he chose Walsh. He brought her here to this chair. I heard her scream. Her voice cracked, the pistol wavering. I was too late. Ethan's stomach churned, but he saw an opening. We're not too late for Sophie, he said, his voice thick with conviction. Shadow led us here, just like he led us to her. Anna's dog, Max, he's fighting for her still. Clara's gaze shifted to Shadow, her expression softening, the pistol lowering slightly. Max, she whispered, her voice raw. You never gave up, did you? Before Clara could decide, a loud crack split the air, a rifle shot shattering the cabin's boarded window. Clara dropped to the floor, the pistol skidding across the wood. Ethan tackled Lila behind a crate, his heart racing. Shadow barked furiously, lunging at the door as footsteps crunched outside. Holt's men, Lila whispered, her voice trembling. Ethan grabbed the USB drive from the floor, his mind spinning. Clara's presence was a shock, but her words confirmed Walsh's reach. The safe house was compromised, and they were surrounded. Clara, help us, Ethan said, his voice urgent. For Anna, Clara hesitated, then nodded, grabbing her pistol. There's a back exit, she said, her voice steadier. Follow me. Shadow led the way, his barks guiding them through the dark as gunfire echoed outside. Ethan scooped up Sophie, who'd crept to the cabin's edge, her eyes wide with fear. The USB drive, Anna's final stand, was their only leverage against Walsh, but as they slipped through the back exit, a new realization hit Ethan. Clara knew too much, and her sudden return wasn't just grief. She was hiding something, and Shadow's wary glance at her said he sensed it too. The blackthorn woods pulsed with danger, the air thick with the scent of pine and gunpowder as Ethan Carter, Lila Tran, and Sophie Miller slipped through the narrow back exit of the safe house. Clara Evans, Anna's sister, led the way, her pistol gripped tightly, her gaunt face set with a mix of fear and resolve. Shadow, the German shepherd once called Max, moved like a sentinel at their side, his bloodied paw leaving faint prints in the mud, his amber eyes darting to every rustle in the dark. The USB drive, Anna's evidence against Mayor Gregory Walsh's fentanyl empire, burned a hole in Ethan's pocket alongside the bloodied keychain marked with Officer Ryan Holt's initials. Gunshots still echoed from the safe house, where Holt's men hunted them, unaware that Clara's sudden arrival had shifted the game. But Ethan's gut twisted. Clara's knowledge of the safe house and her cryptic words hinted at a deeper secret, and Shadow's wary glances at her only deepened his unease. The forest was a maze of shadows, the charred pines closing in as they moved toward the ridge where Ethan's truck waited. Sophie clung to Lila's hand, her small frame shivering, her eyes wide but trusting as she glanced at Shadow. He's not scared, she whispered, her voice soft but steady. Lila squeezed her hand, her soot-streaked face softening. Neither are you, Sophie. You're tougher than all of us.
Ethan's heart ached, the weight of his brother Tommy's death in these woods fueling his need to protect her. But Clara's presence gnawed at him. Why had she returned now, after 5 years, and why did Shadow, Anna's loyal dog, tense every time she moved closer? "We're almost at the road," Clara said, her voice low, her pistol sweeping the trees. "Holt's men won't follow us out of the woods. Walsh doesn't like loose ends in public." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Walsh," he said, his voice hard. "You knew he was behind Anna's death. Why didn't you come forward?" Clara's eyes flickered, pain and guilt flashing across her face. "I tried. I went to the feds, but Walsh's reach is long. They shut me down, threatened my family. I've been hiding, watching, waiting for a chance to finish what Anna started." Lila's voice was sharp, her flashlight cutting through the dark. "Watching. You knew about Sophie and did nothing." Clara flinched, her voice breaking. "I didn't know about her until yesterday. I saw Holt's men move her to the warehouse. I was planning to act, but then you showed up with Max." Shadow whined at the name, pressing closer to Sophie, and Ethan's unease grew. Clara's story made sense, but something felt off, like a puzzle piece forced into the wrong slot. They reached the ridge, the faint outline of the rescue truck visible through the trees. Ethan set Sophie down, his hand on her shoulder. "Stay with Lila," he said, his voice gentle but firm. He turned to Clara, his eyes narrowing. "What's on that USB drive, Clara? What did Anna have that scared Walsh so much?" Clara hesitated, her grip on the pistol tightening. "Emails, bank records, proof Walsh funded the fentanyl ring through city contracts. Anna found it when she audited the mayor's office. She was going to blow it wide open." Ethan's mind raced. Walsh, Port Haven's beloved mayor, wasn't just a kingpin. He was a master manipulator, hiding behind his hope speeches while poisoning the town. But before he could press Clara further, Shadow's growl turned feral, his body tensing as he faced the trees behind them. A twig snapped and a figure stepped into the moonlight. Gregory Walsh himself, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, a revolver in his hand. His smile was cold, his eyes glinting with menace. "You've been busy, Carter," he said, his voice smooth as ice. "But you're out of your league," Lila gasped, pulling Sophie behind her, while Clara spun, her pistol aimed at Walsh. Ethan's heart stopped, the twist hitting like a freight train. Walsh here in the woods. "You're the boss," Ethan said, his voice low, the USB drive heavy in his pocket. Walsh's smile widened, but it was Clara's reaction that chilled him. She lowered her pistol, her face unreadable. "Clara?" Lila whispered, her voice trembling. "What are you doing?" Clara's voice was flat, her eyes avoiding Ethan's. "I'm sorry." Walsh made a deal. "My family's safety for my silence." Ethan's blood ran cold. Clara wasn't just a grieving sister. She was compromised, playing both sides to survive. Shadow's growl deepened, his body coiled, his loyalty to Anna unwavering even now. "You sold out your own sister," Ethan said, his voice thick with disgust. Clara's eyes welled up, but she didn't move. "You don't know what he's capable of," she whispered. Walsh chuckled, his revolver steady. "Port Haven's mine, Carter. Anna thought she could change that." "So did your brother. Pity they didn't listen." The mention of Tommy was a knife to Ethan's chest, rage boiling over. "You killed him," he spat, stepping forward despite the gun. "You and Holt poisoning this town." Walsh shrugged, his voice calm. "Collateral damage, like you, if you don't hand over that drive." Lila's voice cut through, fierce, despite the fear. "You're done, Walsh. That drive's going public. You can't burn the truth." Walsh's smile faltered, but before he could respond, Shadow lunged, a blur of fur and fury.
The dog's teeth sank into Walsh's wrist, the revolver firing wildly into the dirt. Walsh screamed, stumbling back, and Ethan tackled him, pinning him to the ground. Lila grabbed the gun, her hands shaking but steady, while Sophie clung to her, sobbing. Clara stood frozen, her pistol limp at her side. "Clara, help us!" Ethan shouted, struggling to hold Walsh. But Clara's face crumpled, and she turned, disappearing into the trees, her betrayal a wound as deep as Walsh's. Shadow stood over Walsh, his growl unrelenting, his scarred flank a testament to his fight. Ethan zip-tied Walsh's hands, his chest heaving. "You're finished," he said, his voice raw. "For Anna, for Tommy, for Sophie." Lila knelt beside Sophie, her voice soft but urgent. "We've got him, Sophie. You're safe now." But Sophie's eyes were on Shadow, who limped back to her, pressing his head against her side. "He knew," she whispered, her voice trembling. "He knew where to find me." Ethan's throat tightened, the USB drive in his pocket a beacon of hope amidst the betrayal. Walsh was down, but Holt was still out there, and Clara's defection meant the fight was far from over. As Shadow's whine filled the air, Ethan realized the dog wasn't just leading them to Sophie. He was leading them to a truth that could tear Port Haven apart. The Blackthorn woods seemed to hold their breath, the charred pines standing like silent USB drive. Anna Evans's proof of Walsh's fentanyl empire weighed heavy in Ethan's pocket alongside the bloodied keychain marked with Officer Ryan Holt's initials. Lila Tran walked beside him, her arm around Sophie Miller, the 9-year-old's face pale but resolute, her small hand clutching Lila's. Shadow, the German shepherd once called Max, limped ahead, his bloodied paw marking the path, his amber eyes scanning the dark for threats. Clara Evans' betrayal, her sudden flight into the woods after siding with Walsh, stung like a fresh wound, but Ethan's focus was razor-sharp. Walsh was down, but Holt was still out there, and the safe house's secrets had exposed a conspiracy that threatened to swallow Port Haven whole. The ridge where Ethan's rescue truck waited was close, its faint outline visible through the trees. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and smoke, the warehouse fire's distant glow, a grim reminder of their narrow escape. Sophie's voice, soft but steady, broke the silence. "Is it over?" she asked, her eyes on Shadow, who glanced back as if to reassure her. Lila knelt, brushing a strand of hair from Sophie's face. "Not yet, kiddo." "But we're getting there. You and Max, you're the bravest ones here." Sophie's lips trembled, but she nodded, her small hand reaching for Shadow's fur. The dog whined, pressing his nose against her, and Ethan's chest tightened. This dog had carried a bloodied shoe across Port Haven to save her, and now he was their guide through hell. Ethan's grip on Walsh tightened, the mayor's tailored suit torn and muddied, his smug smile replaced by a scowl. "You're fools," Walsh spat, his voice low but venomous. "You think that drive changes anything? I own this town. Cops, judges, the whole damn system." Ethan's jaw clenched, memories of his brother Tommy's overdose fueling his rage. "You owned my brother's life," he said, his voice raw. "You don't own me." Walsh's eyes narrowed, but before he could retort, Shadow's growl cut through the air, deep and feral, his body tensing as he faced the trees. Lila's flashlight swept the dark, catching a glint of metal, a rifle barrel, glinting in the moonlight. "Ethan, get down!" she shouted, pulling Sophie behind a boulder. Ethan shoved Walsh to the ground, diving for cover as a shot rang out, splintering a nearby pine. Shadow barked furiously, his hackles raised, lunging toward the threat. Ethan's heart raced, his utility knife useless against gunfire. "Holt," he muttered, his voice tight. The cop had been one step ahead, and now he was closing the trap.
Two figures emerged from the shadows, both armed. Holt, his face hard, and a second man, broad-shouldered, with a scar across his cheek. "You should have burned, Carter," Holt called, his voice cold. "Now you're just making this messy." Ethan's blood boiled, but he stayed low, his eyes on Shadow, who circled the boulder, his growl unrelenting. Lila's voice was a fierce whisper. "We can't fight them head-on. We need a plan." Ethan nodded, his mind racing. The USB drive was their leverage, but only if they survived. Sophie's small voice cut through the tension. "Max can help," she whispered, her eyes wide. "He's smart." Ethan glanced at Shadow, whose disciplined posture screamed canine training, and a desperate idea formed. "Lila, keep Sophie safe. I'll draw their fire." Lila's eyes widened, but she nodded, her pocket knife ready. Ethan grabbed a rock, tossing it into the trees to the left. The sound drew a shot, and Shadow seized the moment, bolting toward Holt's partner, a blur of fur and fury. The man screamed as Shadow's teeth sank into his arm, the rifle clattering to the ground. Ethan charged Holt, tackling him before he could fire again. They hit the mud, fists flying, Holt's strength surprising for a man who'd hidden behind a badge. "You're dead, Carter!" Holt snarled, landing a blow to Ethan's jaw. Ethan grunted, his vision blurring, but he drove his knee into Holt's stomach, pinning him. "For Tommy," he growled, slamming Holt's head into the dirt. Lila rushed forward, zip-tying Holt's wrists, her hands shaking but steady. "Got him," she said, her voice fierce. But the victory was short-lived. Walsh, forgotten in the chaos, had slipped his zip ties, a knife glinting in his hand as he lunged at Lila. Sophie screamed, and Shadow, still grappling with the second man, spun, his growl turning savage. The dog launched himself at Walsh, knocking him to the ground, his teeth bared inches from the mare's throat. Walsh froze, his knife dropping, his face pale. "Call it off," he shouted, his voice cracking. Ethan staggered to his feet, blood trickling from his lip. "He's not mine to call," he said, his voice low. "He's Anna's." Lila pulled Sophie close, her voice trembling. "It's okay, Sophie. Max has him." But as Ethan moved to secure Walsh, a new sound stopped him cold, a low, pained whimper from Shadow. The dog swayed, his bloodied paw giving out, a fresh wound glistening on his flank. The second man, now disarmed, had slashed him before Lila knocked him out with a rock. Ethan's heart sank, his voice raw. "Max, hold on, buddy." He knelt beside the dog, his hands gentle, but Shadow's eyes stayed locked on Sophie, as if ensuring she was safe. Lila's training kicked in, her medkit open in seconds. "He's losing blood," she said, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. "I can stabilize him, but we need to move." Ethan nodded, his throat tight, and turned to Walsh, who lay pinned under Shadow's fading strength. "You're done," he said, his voice thick with rage. "This ends tonight." But Walsh's lips curled into a faint smile, his voice a chilling whisper. "You think I'm the top? You're chasing shadows, Carter. The real power's bigger than me." The words hit like a twist of the knife. Walsh wasn't the mastermind, just a cog in a larger machine. Ethan's mind reeled, but Sophie's voice pulled him back. "Max saved me," she said, her small hand on the dog's fur. "He's a hero." Ethan's resolve hardened, the USB drive in his pocket, a beacon of hope. He zip-tied Walsh again, tighter this time, and helped Lila lift Shadow, the dog's breathing shallow but steady. Holt and his man lay unconscious, but the woods felt alive with unseen eyes. As they staggered toward the truck, Lila's voice was fierce, her eyes on Sophie. "We're getting you home, kiddo, and Max is coming with us." Ethan carried Shadow, his heart heavy with the dog's sacrifice and Walsh's ominous warning. The fight had cost them, but it wasn't over. The USB drive held the truth, and Shadow had led them this far. As the truck's headlights cut through the dark, Ethan knew they were walking into a bigger war, one that would test their courage and Shadow's unbreakable loyalty. The first light of dawn crept over Port Haven, casting a golden glow across the fire station on Elm Street, where the scars of the night's battle lingered in the air. Ethan Carter stood outside, his clothes still dusted with ash, his bruised jaw a reminder of the fight that had brought down Mayor Gregory Walsh and Officer Ryan Holt. Lila Tran leaned against the station's wall, her med kit at her feet, her eyes tracing the horizon where blackthorn woods faded into mist. Sophie Miller sat on a bench, wrapped in a blanket, her parents' arms around her, their tears mingling with smiles of relief. Shadow, the German shepherd once called Max, rested inside on a soft bed, his bandaged flank rising with steady breaths, his amber eyes calm but watchful. The USB drive, Anna Evans's proof of Walsh's fentanyl empire, was now with the FBI, its emails and bank records unraveling a network that stretched far beyond Oregon's borders. Walsh and Holt were in cuffs, their reign over Port Haven shattered, but Walsh's chilling words echoed in Ethan's mind. "The real power's bigger than me." Sophie's father gripped Ethan's hand, his voice thick. "You gave us our daughter back. We'll never forget that." Sophie, clutching a crayon drawing of Shadow, ran to Lila, her eyes bright despite the trauma. "Miss..." "Lila, is Max gonna be okay?" Lila knelt, her smile soft but weary. "He's a fighter, Sophie, like you." Sophie's gaze shifted to the station's open door, where Shadow lay. "He found me when I was scared. He's my hero." Ethan's throat tightened, the weight of his brother Tommy's loss easing just a fraction. Shadow had carried a bloodied shoe across town to save Sophie, and in doing so he'd given Ethan a chance to redeem his own failures. Inside, Clara Evans sat alone, her gaunt face heavy with regret. She'd returned at dawn, turning herself in after fleeing the woods, her brief alliance with Walsh a desperate act to shield her family. "I let Anna down," she told Ethan, her voice barely above a whisper. "But Max never did. He led you to her truth." Ethan placed a hand on her shoulder, his voice steady. "You came back, Clara." "That matters." Clara's eyes met Shadow's, and a faint smile broke through her pain. "I'll take him home. He's earned it." Ethan nodded, his chest aching at the thought of losing Max, but knowing it was right. The dog had fought for Anna, for Sophie, for them all. The station hummed with quiet purpose, firefighters and EMTs sharing coffee, their faces lit with a cautious hope. Lila joined Ethan outside, her voice low but firm. "Feds called, the drive's blowing the lid off Walsh's operation, cartels, city contracts, even ties to D.C. We didn't just save Sophie, Ethan. We started something." Ethan's gaze drifted to the woods, where Tommy's memory still lingered. "For him, too," he said, his voice raw. Lila's hand brushed his, a silent promise. "For everyone." A crowd gathered, unannounced, led by Sophie's parents. The fire chief stepped forward, a medal of valor glinting in his hand. "For Max," he said, clipping it to the dog's new collar, "who showed us what courage looks like." Shadow's tail thumped once, his eyes blinking slowly, and the crowd cheered, their voices a chorus of gratitude. Sophie handed Lila her drawing, now framed, titled, "Max, My Guardian." "It's for him," she said, her voice clear. Lila's eyes welled up, and she hugged Sophie tight. "He'll love it, kiddo." But a final twist waited, tucked in the pages of Anna's notebook, which Clara had slipped to Ethan before leaving. A letter, in Anna's handwriting, addressed to Clara. "If I'm gone, trust Max, he'll find the way."
Inside was a photo of Anna and Shadow and a name scrawled in the margin, Senator R. Caldwell. Ethan's blood ran cold. Caldwell, a political heavyweight who'd shared stages with Walsh, was the shadow behind the empire. Clara's voice was fierce as she met Ethan's gaze. "I'm not done, Carter. Anna's fight is mine now." Ethan gripped her hand, his resolve unwavering. "Ours too." As Clara loaded Shadow into her car, the dog's head resting on her lap, Ethan and Lila stood with Sophie, watching the sunrise. "What's next?" Lila asked, her voice soft but steady. Ethan looked at Sophie, then the station, where Max's bed remained. "We rebuild, Lila, for Port Haven." "For Max." Sophie's voice rang out, small but fierce. "And we tell his story, so no one forgets." Ethan smiled, the dawn's light warming his face, the weight of the night lifting. Months later, Port Haven dedicated Max's Trail, a park where the woods once stood, its paths lined with stones etched with words like loyalty and courage. A plaque at the center read, "Max, the one who remembered." Ethan and Lila, now bound by more than duty, led the project, their partnership a quiet strength. Sophie visited often, her drawings of Max a testament to healing. Every morning Ethan walked the trail, feeling Tommy's presence, knowing Max had led them to redemption. To everyone watching, Max's story is more than a dog's. It's about standing up, holding on, and fighting for what's right, no matter the odds. Share your story of a loyal pet below. What moment showed you their heart? Subscribe to Pawprints of Hope. Join our community, and let's keep these stories alive. Stories like Max's that prove heroes don't always wear badges, but they always carry truth.